climate change literally is water change. Like when you're talking about the impact of climate change, like whether you say it's 71 or 74% of the overall impact of it, it's three-quarters of the ball game.
This is the Future of Finance. Hey everyone, welcome to the Future of Finance. I'm Georges Dyer, and today's conversation is all about water. The foundation of life, something we all rely on, and yet our global water systems are under immense pressure. Climate change, aging infrastructure, and increasing demand are creating a perfect storm that threatens communities, businesses, and ecosystems. But where there are challenges, there are opportunities, and often overlooked, underappreciated opportunities for investors. Today, my guest is Tom Ferguson, founder and managing partner at Burnt Island Ventures, one of the few venture capital firms focused entirely on water innovation. Tom and his team are identifying and backing the most promising startups that are tackling the water crisis head-on, from breakthrough technologies in treatment and conservation to data-driven solutions that make water management smarter and more efficient. We face a big crisis at the nexus of water and climate, and Tom brings a unique perspective on why water investing is not just a moral imperative, but a financial opportunity that's only going to grow in importance. So let's dive in. Tom, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining the podcast. How you doing?
Very well indeed. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, definitely. So I imagine you have been busy as always.
Yeah. I mean, 2024 was a lot. I think for a lot of the people you'll be speaking to on this, reminiscing about 2024. I mean, some people got out of jail, but I had a founder that was going through quite a tricky fundraise that they completed, and he referred to it as Type 3 fun. So Type 1 is the one where it's fun at the time and it's fun to look back on. Type 2 is not fun at the time and fun to look back on. And Type 3 is not fun at the time and not fun to look back on. But feels kind of necessary. It's what like mountaineers need.
Gotcha. I was going to say, so not fun at all, but I see what you're saying. Yeah,
but it's
satisfying.
It was an interesting year. Mercifully, I gave myself shingles at the end of it. But yeah, we're feeling 2025 it's certainly an interesting one so far. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we are undeterred on the water side of things. Everything just feels a lot even more necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll get into some of that, but first, why don't you share a little bit about Burnt Island Ventures and how you got focused on water?
Yeah, for sure. So I sort of say that this comes from quite an entrepreneurially honest place, which helpfully is something that we look for in the founders that we do. But really, in essence, I used to run an accelerator in water. It was the accelerator of Imagine H2O, which is an extraordinary non-profit organization. That essentially the theory of change is that if you can find the smartest entrepreneurs acting on all sorts of impact verticals and help them to build the most solid basis for those companies. Like if you can get that solid basis in place, what that allows them is to manifest the impact because it's built on rock rather than on sand, right? Lots of people promise the impact, but they never get there because the fundamental economics don't work or the entrepreneurial infrastructure isn't there. Mm-hmm. So that was my training ground for the first kind of 5.5 years. I kind of ran that accelerator with some amazing colleagues.
And where is that? Where's the accelerator?
It's based in San Francisco, but it's kind of disaggregated now.
Right.
It's kind of joined the kind of post-COVID revolution. But I still have colleagues there from previously who are doing amazing work. But in 2022, things happened. Firstly, I was sort of party to a data set that no one else in the world had, which was essentially how good are the people who are starting companies in water? Mm-hmm. And the answer was way better than they had ever been, and actually a critical mass. But there was still no seed fund that was going to write checks of a decent size at a decent regularity in order to put a real portfolio together to really build what every other vertical of early stage venture funding already has, which is a set of investors that know their onions that are going to go and participate in this market. So I decided let's go build it. Built the argument, put a 30 million first fund in place. We stopped fundraising in February 2022, and it was a first object lesson that it's better to be lucky than good, I think. We were really lucky. but yeah, now we're just on our second fund. We put in an opportunity fund in place because there's a sort of corollary opportunity at the growth stage. And yeah, we're just trying to build the investment vehicle for the water sector that we think can be a huge advantage to the best and brightest that are building really high impact kind of solutions in water.
Yeah. So tell us what that means a little bit when you say in water. Obviously, water
Sure.
is
Yeah.
part of everything.
Yeah.
So how
What
do
do
you
you
think
mean?
about
Yeah.
it?
70% of the Earth's surface, 70% of our bodies.
Right.
Yeah, it is everywhere. We actually did look at I mean, it was more out of curiosity than anything else, but PFAS removal from the body. PFAS are the forever chemicals that were in
Yeah.
like Teflon and non-stick pans and all this kind of stuff. That was definitely outside of our remit, like bodily removal of concentrated toxic
Right.
chemicals.
Well, so hopefully
It
someone
was
can
great.
figure that out, though.
It was very cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and somebody else is going to invest in it, but we
Yeah.
just have no idea how that would work. What we mean by water is essentially the terrestrial water setup that supports everything from giving your kids a bath to making sure that Taiwan Semiconductor's new semiconductor fabs in Arizona have water that is pure enough in order to build the semiconductors that we need. And so, like, if you go take yourself back to grade school when you were like probably top of the class and sitting there and imagine yourself as a water molecule on the sea, you get evaporated off the ocean, you go up, you hit a mountain, you go out, you really like precipitate down, then you hit the ground, and then there is sort of you choose your pathway. You either go into groundwater, or you go into a river, or you go into a reservoir or a lake or like whatever it is. But then you come into contact with kind of all of human activity. And there's all sorts of stuff that happens to you as a water molecule. Sometimes you are stored, sometimes you are in process, sometimes but all of that needs to be either put through pipes or it needs to be pumped places, and all of the way around it needs to be sensed. The quality needs to be understood. The volume needs to be understood. What you are stored in needs to be maintained. It needs to make sure it doesn't collapse, right? The efficiency of use at the point of use needs to be as effective as possible. Once you have been used through a process, you need to, like, it needs to be treated to make sure all of the various degrees of BS that has been injected into water, because it is a remarkably good solvent, is removed, so it can then be reprovided back to nature. But it's really anything that happens on land. There are two asterisks, because there, of course, there are. Like desalination is definitely within our remit because it's
Okay.
essentially a new source of water.
Right.
And then we also color outside the lines a little bit, something like Aquatic Labs, which is an amazing business. At the core of it, it's a sensor that's going to be very, very important in terms of the monitoring, reporting, and verification, especially of one of their first markets is ocean-based permanent carbon dioxide removal. We went outside the lines because we have really, really great co-investors in that, including Propeller, who are ocean specialists, and then Alan Adams is really good. But also the sensor array will have massive implications for things that happen on land. But otherwise, yeah, we're just looking at helping the terrestrial water system function better. But hopefully, it gives you an idea of the breadth of what
Yeah.
we're not just like hanging about utilities praying that they're going to move fast enough. We have a very, very wide market indeed.
Right. Right. And when you say outside the lines, you mean if you're dealing with some applications that involve the ocean and fresh water.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Going into the salty stuff.
Yeah.
I know enough to be dangerous about the salty stuff. But there are people, yeah, like the team at Propeller, and obviously, Schmidt Marine and Catapult, and all the rest of these amazing guys that know, amazing teams that know a lot about the oceans, and we know enough to be dangerous, but it's not strictly within our circle of competence. We're about like the provision of fresh water and and where it is useful kind of within the society, which just happens to be kind of everywhere.
Everywhere. Yeah. Gotcha. Well, I want to dig into like some specific examples. But first, would love the origin of the name Burnt Island. What's the backstory?
Yeah. Everyone's like, "Oh, Tom, do you think that the world's going to be on fire?" And I'm like, "I hope not. Certainly on the islands." No, these are they. These are they behind me. If you're listening to this on audio, you can't see where my fingers are pointing, but I have some pictures behind me on the wall. My favorite view in all the world is above where my grandparents used to live on the west coast of Scotland, about 2 hours west of Glasgow, in an unutterably beautiful place called Tinnabrugh on the Kyles of Bute. And my parents still live there, just over the hill. And that view is down the east Kyle of the Kyles of Bute, and at the mouth of the east Kyle, which is basically a kind of a strait, essentially in between an island and the mainland. at the mouth of that at the mouth of the East Kyle are three islands called the Burnt Islands, and I think there's something kind of like permanent and resilient about them. They've watched the tide go in for 6 hours and out for 6 hours for millennia. They stand kind of sentinel of this sort of community that I know and I love.
Very cool.
But also like names are really important. You say them all the time, and now I get to think about that view and
Yeah.
like running around in the west coast of Scotland. I think it's great to have that association. So yeah,
I
that's
love
where
it. Very
that's where it
cool.
came
It sounds beautiful. And yeah, I'm gonna have to come visit my
from. Heartily recommend it.
yeah, my nephew just started, is a freshman at St. Andrews, so I don't know
No,
how
well,
far
I'm a
that is.
University of
But
Edinburgh grad. I'm a
ah,
University of Edinburgh grad, so we're
right
basically
on.
neighbours.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah,
That's good.
dying to get over and visit him, and yeah, I'll have to
Good for him.
coordinate next time
Yeah,
you're visiting
definitely.
home.
Go to the pub.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
yeah, I would just love to like get more specific to the extent you can. Share a little bit
Sure.
about first of all how you find companies and source companies, and then yeah,
Yeah.
just some more examples of like what you're most excited about in terms of innovative solutions you're seeing out there in
Yeah,
water.
I'll walk you through some recent ones because we've had some really fun activity and it gives you an idea of the breadth. I mean, just in terms of the sourcing side of things, like look, the job when you're a specialist, I mean, I kind of bridle at I like when everyone's like, it's such a cool niche. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it's like it's $1.6 trillion a year just in CapEx and OpEx.
Right.
And it touches literally everything, and it's the only thing that we can't go without with for 3 days, otherwise we die. Like, I mean, it's there's niche and then there's niche, right? Anyway, but regardless, if you are going to be only doing water, the job is to miss nothing, and so your sourcing engine has to be really quite good. And so the like I like running an accelerator at Imagine H2O is a relatively visible role. I also have no problem in humiliating myself on varieties of stages. And so people sort of, I was kind of a known quantity within this world. I'd also worked with about 100 of the best entrepreneurs from kind of the prior 10 years, and founders tend to find founders. But founders also find other people kind of within the water sector, and we're no more than 1 degree of separation away from kind of anybody really within anybody who's doing anything innovative in water, more or less worldwide.
So it's really
And so it
diving into
started.
the space and having the network and
Yeah,
building it out
exactly.
from
So I
there
had
over
already built a
years.
network, and
Yeah.
then we just augmented it. Firstly, with hiring my colleague Marissa Sterling, she runs platform for us, and really the idea of platform is kind of twofold. One, to make sure that we deliver on our promises to founders. The usual VC thing of like, hey, I promised the world, then don't do anything about it. We like. It was really important that we delivered on that first, and so Marissa joined us getting on for 3 years ago now, and she's done an absolutely extraordinary job making sure that we provide that value, but also to make sure we were visible. We worked very hard on our voice within the market, and making sure that we were clear, and that's evolved into we have a pod ourselves. I know, everyone has something.
Everyone.
But
Yeah.
the fundamental molecule, which is the idea, is for it to be a library of insight from all of the best entrepreneurs who have kind of already done it, so that the
Uh-huh.
next cadre can come along and avoid all of the mistakes that they made. That's why
Yeah.
it's
Fundamental molecule, it's called.
the fundamental molecule. Yeah, you
Nice.
can get it on all platforms of repute and frankly disrepute. Yeah. Do give it a listen because
Yeah.
it's a fun bunch of deep dives.
That sounds great.
And then I have really fantastic partners. Christine, who joined us like 2 years ago. She was on our IC, and then Steve, who joined us at the end of 2023. They also have ready built networks. So we really do have a wide surface area. But then my colleague Jenny, who's our investment associate, has done really wonderful work in terms of our outbound. But the bar is so high. Like we have to see everything. So we get very upset when we see rounds that happened without us knowing. Usually it's like stuff that we probably wouldn't have participated in,
Right.
which is good, but also slightly self-serving. But yeah, we have a good surface area, and hopefully over time we're becoming easier and easier to find.
Right.
But then you asked about like how that manifests, like what
Yeah.
we're seeing. So, I mean, I'll just take you through the kind of like the last two investments and one that's forthcoming. Desalination, legacy desalination is kind of brute force and kind of stupid. So its intrinsic problem, well, there are lots of intrinsic problems, but if you had to choose three, one, it takes up a lot of land. And unless you're putting it out in the middle of nowhere. But if it's the middle of nowhere, you then by default have to pipe it miles
Right.
to get it to where the people
Where
are,
you
which
need
is
it.
by definition not the middle of nowhere. Secondly, smashes up coastal ecosystems from the kind of putting out like highly salty water back into the ocean because you pulled out the fresh and then you want to throw away. But the thing that is really offensive is that you, from a kind of an engineering perspective, is that you have to pump up 100% of the water, like into the system on the land, and then you only get, best case, you only get about 60% of the water out, and then you have to repump back into the sea 40% of the water that you pumped in the first place,
pumped in,
which is just a standalone dumb waste of time.
And energy too.
Waste of time and energy and chemicals and capex. Like these things are like so much bigger than they would actually need to be. Like it's like the economics are really nowhere near as compelling as they should be because the whole thing is slightly ass backwards, essentially because we do it on land.
Yeah.
Things get really interesting when you put them under the sea. So subsea desalination allows you to benefit from a bunch of other things. Firstly, like land costs in subsea are like if you have to pay for it at all, I mean, you have to get permits for international waters and all that kind of stuff. But it's, there's no comparison.
But subsea, you're saying this is actually happening
500
underwater.
meters. Yeah,
500
if you're
meters
doing
down
it
the
at like
ocean.
500 meters, which is like below the midnight zone. For all of you who have kids, you know exactly what the midnight zone is. It's very, very, like only extremophiles live down there. It's really quite, it's a lot more saline, a lot colder. Water's much purer down there. But you benefit from being at very, very high pressure already. And so if you can get something at 500 meters, you can actually harness that ambient pressure to help push water through the membrane, which is the active element of filtration. But the key is that the if you have the right pump, and this is like operating at 500 meters is no joke, but if you have the right pump, you can actually just pull the water from one side of the membrane. Like, so rather than like pulling out all of it, you're actually only pumping the water that was, or only the fresh water that's already passed through it. You don't actually need to pump all the stuff that you've thrown away.
Right.
And then you do need the energy to get it back up to shore, right? But what you end up with is about a 35 to 40% energy reduction at the creation of fresh water. You obviously have miles less capex. And then all you need to do is build a pipeline, and you can actually pipe it directly into the middle of a
city or
central business district, no problem, and plug it straight into the distribution line. And that's what Flotion do. Which is an amazing Norwegian crew. They're ex kind of Norwegian military. They've done subsea for years in the North Sea, which anybody who knows anything about the North Sea is about the least hospitable operating environment that you've ever seen. It is a nasty place. And they've been doing it forever. They're subsea oil and gas guys who are learning to be water guys.
I was going to say, it sounds like a great element of a just transition too, from those, deep sea oil workers to work on stuff like this.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Because, if you think people sort of like wonder about the operations and maintenance of something like this.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same as operating and maintaining, people who would have been on oil rigs, looking at dealing with the pipes, but also this, like the stands of oil rigs, etc. Like as these things come out of commission, you need people who have been in those operating environments before. And this is going to be a proliferation.
Can any of that infrastructure be used for this kind of thing? Like repurposed? Sorry? Can any of that actual infrastructure be repurposed for this kind of thing? Like actual?
So that, I mean, probably some of the, definitely some of the subsea pumps for sure. Yeah. That's probably about it.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's pretty different.
Yeah, the end of life is the best thing actually to do is to give them a good clean and then sink them to make them reefs.
Right.
It's been a long time since I did work around that. But yeah, in terms of the human capital, like you can literally swap from one to the other. Yeah. And it's it's just a tremendously compelling opportunity.
What stage are they at? I mean, do these things exist in Norway?
Yeah, they have I can't say where it is, but they have their first pilot running, and they've done it unbelievably quickly. It's really cool. And then they already have LOIs in place with a variety of, especially kind of local governments, which is very interesting. There are people who are in very serious pain around this. One of the ramifications of climate change is that precipitation patterns are changing inexorably. And like the logic of where we have chosen to situate ourselves is by implication predicated more or less explicitly on availability of water.
Right.
And especially for, you can fill in the gaps. But if your rainfall changes
Yeah.
and you're drawing down like subsurface resources and you really don't have much in the way of access to rivers, you like living in that place is fundamentally in danger. Um, and so having something that can be modular, that can provide reasonably affordable water on long-term contracts, that can essentially replace the rain without having to do all of the crazily over-engineered and expensive like legacy desalination stuff, it's a real step change
Yeah.
in being able to like get to a kind of desalinated future, which I the world is more complicated than a desalinated future. Like it drives me a bit nuts when
Right. But that's a
Captain
piece
Musk.
of a
Yeah, it is.
much
Of
bigger
course, he
puzzle.
stands up at the International Water Congress in the Philippines and says, "It's solved. All you need to do is like desalinate everything." It's like,
Right.
no, it's not. It's really complicated. And actually, you saying that means that you haven't thought about it for more than about 5 seconds. And in just glorious irony, his gigafactory in Texas can't get access to the water resources it needs to function. Whoops. So
Yeah.
we'll see. But that's a good one. And I'm happy to talk about more examples. But yeah, we're excited about the guys at Flotion.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I want to get a little more into the water climate intersection that you alluded
Sure.
to, but maybe just one more
Yeah.
example of like a terrestrial type of
Yes,
technology or application.
absolutely. Yeah. So which one am I going to choose? I think that let's go on to the software side of things because it's our largest holding from Fund One, and we've invested in through our Opportunity Fund, which is our growth stage vehicle, just because there's a kind of a gigantic white space and nobody is providing dedicated large checks to companies at the Series B stage. It's the same thing we saw at the seed. It's just we're now 5 years later.
Wow. Yeah.
But Doppler is a great example of a very, very nuanced solution to a problem that every utility faces, and that anybody who is a client of a utility, which is everybody, would have no idea is there. So when you are working with a utility, frankly, whether it's power, but we'll focus on kind of the water and the wastewater side of things, like they constantly have crews out in the field. Like they're kind of like fixing and checking leaks and running water through hydrants and all that kind of stuff. Like they're doing the work to keep the system functioning. But at the moment, the way in which they are fed information is through somebody who, on average, lasts in that job, lasts in the kind of call center or kind of information center at the utility about 8 months. They know nothing about the functioning of the utility. It's incredibly insecure. They like because this is a terrible job. It's a
Gotcha.
terrible job because the
Yeah.
only time that people interact with their utility is when
Right.
something is going wrong, when the water is backed up, or the water is the wrong color, or the water smells weird, or it's
Right.
not coming through at all, right? And so people, of course, they don't want to sit there being the conduit for information out to the field crews who are there to do something about it. It would be so much better if there was a system that sat in the middle of that and took in the information from the customers of the utilities to flawlessly diagnose what is going on, triage the immediacy of what is needed, and then automatically tell the field crews where they are most needed. So they are being as efficient as they possibly can. And then there's also all sorts of knock-on effects in terms of like just cost overall, right? One of the most important things we can do in the water sector is to make sure it doesn't get more expensive. Like when people speak to us, it's always like, Tom, water's really, really cheap. Like how do you build any business models out of it? Now I don't even want to go into that question because they are lying around. They're lying around. We want to keep it cheap. We do not want people, we want people to have like water needs to be accessible affordably, but that means that we need to do whatever we can to limit the upwards pressure on price rises. And
Right.
in the context of like just quote say in the US, right? Like when you look at the example, I mean, like Flint was a canary in the coal mine, but then you had like Jackson, Mississippi, right? Jackson, Mississippi was the largest really extreme example, but like boil water warnings are going on all over the country now, and they're just never reported on because they're not news anymore. And that
Right.
is just it literally means that what's coming out of the water isn't fit for purpose. The system is breaking. And so we need to do whatever we can to make it function as efficiently as possible. So in the context of the field crews and making sure that the maintenance is being done in the order that it needs to be done as efficiently as possible, and that you're not wasting people's times on frivolous calls,
Right.
like Doppler fills that gap. They're actually very rarely refer to them. It is AI. It's about 140 discrete, and not large language model. They're small, inspectable language models.
Okay. Yeah.
CPO is absolutely exceptional, but they never talk about being AI. They never talk about being AI because like the utilities have barely got used to using Excel sheets. You can't walk up to them and say like, "Hey, we're an AI solution for
Right.
They don't care
Part of the
what's in
hype.
the box.
Yeah. Just gets
Don't
it
care
done.
what the box does." And they're just they now serve 270 individual communities. They're now international. They're now moving into the power sector. And like every board meeting, John brings up this slide, which is really amazing, which is like the feedback that customers have given the utilities to say thank you. Prior to Doppler, there was no way of doing this.
Right. Like you said, the positive feedback wasn't coming.
There was no way to record it, and it changes the relationship between the utility and the recipient of those services, which historically is that like I'm just going to guess. Do you know what you pay for your water bill every month?
Nope.
Exactly. Like no one does. Even in a room of water people, 15% of people know.
Yeah.
Like we don't interact with this stuff. We totally take it for granted. And so it just makes a really, really meaningful difference, not only to the cost structure of the utility, but the motivations of the people who literally keep the system working. It's it's a very, very powerful and kind of increasingly extraordinarily impressive economic platform.
Very cool. And you make me think, and this might be too much of a rabbit hole, but in terms of water and water pricing, there's
let's go back to it.
It's and I think around the world over the years, there've been different things tried, and they can be very controversial whether water's a right or if it should be priced so that it's conserved and valued. And obviously privatization of water in some places has been a total disaster, and it's human
I'm British,
rights.
I know.
Yeah, human rights implications in some countries and everything, and so just curious what you make of all that. I mean, you shared one principle is that it should be cheap.
Yes, no, it should be. Look, so just starting there again is that in general, especially if you're thinking about really all types of equity, right, and not just in like developed economies like the US, but across the world, like what you do not want, people already spend an appreciable amount of their income on the water that they can get their hands on. It's usually in a bag or a bottle or a canister. But they're already spending too much on it. We actually, rather than raise the price, like the reference price of water, especially in emerging economies, is what is put into a bottle, which is actually quite a big target to go for. But nevertheless, it's already, I would argue, it's already too expensive. But there is room in kind of in developed economies that actually have the data to do it. That why should we not do what Philadelphia is trying, which is essentially kind of means testing, right? It's kind of ridiculous. Like water is a regressive tax. Like whether if you're on like Nob Hill in San Francisco or on the Upper East Side in New York, and you've got a household income of 450 grand a year or like whatever the hell it is, or miles north of that, you still use the same amount of water, but you're paying the same as somebody who is in like southeastern Brooklyn and needs to travel an hour and a half into work to barely make their rent.
Right.
There's an issue of like inequity there, which I think the water industry is trying to deal with.
And the type of use too, right? If you're drinking it or cleaning yourself, it's different than watering your 5-acre lawn.
Expansive lawns and like all that kind of stuff. And so so in the heart of it, and it's often overlooked, is this idea of there is a sort of intrinsic like inequity at the heart of kind of water and increasingly sewerage provision as well, because that's the real stealth tax. I mean, you're water, drinking water is outpacing inflation considerably. World water prices went up 11% last year.
Wow.
But sewerage prices historically have gone up at about 3 times the rate of drinking water prices because they're just much less seen. And it is becoming a big determinant of action, especially on the wastewater side of things.
That 11% increase, is that like supply driven or the cost of treatment, or what's
it's
driving
two things. It's two things. It's like it sounds like I'm over egging the pudding. but if you are like in the US, like the water infrastructure that you rely on quite literally has aged out.
Right.
Depending on which part of infrastructure you're looking at, a wastewater treatment plant is slightly different from a drinking water pipe. But when you break it down, there's generally like it's anywhere between 40 and 50 years that they've been designed for in terms of their useful life. And the median age is now about the average age is about 47 years. And in case of our dam infrastructure, for example, and you do not want those things collapsing, on the average, it has already aged down. Like it's really bad. It's really bad. And so what you're seeing is that utilities, to do the work that they need to make sure that everybody stays safe and stays supplied, they have to raise prices. The job is to interact with the communities in order to be able to make sure that it doesn't feel arbitrary, that you are explaining why this is something that has to happen to households. But we do need to keep an eye on the equity. But the last point I want to make is that we do not need water to be any more expensive. Like the idea that you look at something like BIV and say, well, water's really cheap. Like, how do you build a business model out of it? A meter cubed of water weighs a metric ton. It is an unbelievably effective solvent. It is totally ubiquitous, not only in our like homes from the utility side of things, but in every type of industrial and commercial activity that literally you can think of. And all of those people are not only paying for water, but they're paying for energy to move it around. They're paying for the stuff that they put into it to make it treated. They have all of the hardware that they need to treat it on the way in and treat it on the way out. The costs for the inputs and the cost for energy, as well as chemicals, as well as the water itself, as well as the sewerage on the other end, and all of the components that go into all of the wastewater side of things. All of it is getting more expensive. And we don't need it to get any more expensive for the business models that we find to make sense. Do we have to wait for the things that line up, that have really, really compelling business models that we think can be the economic engine under which you can then drive the impact that we want to see out in the world? Yeah, you've got to be judicious. We've only made, as of tomorrow, 29 investments since late 2020. And we've looked at something on the order of about 3,500, 4,000 companies. This is very selective, but we're like actually less selective than most venture firms, because we don't have a universe of like 15, 20,000 companies a year that we have to somehow get through. Rant over. But yeah, pricing is a tricky one. It is fundamentally mispriced, but for people, we want to keep it cheap. Now, for businesses that have been basically eating a free lunch, and you can talk about AI if you want to, AI's cooling has been a free lunch on water for a long time, or data centers, I should say. But that free lunch is going to end. It needs to become a larger cost component. They need to pay more attention to it.
This episode of the Future of Finance podcast is brought to you by the Intentional Endowments Network and our new Endowment Impact Benchmark, which is an exciting new initiative helping endowments and foundations measure their progress on sustainable investing. Participants receive expert feedback, the ability to benchmark against peers, and earn recognition for their leadership. If you're at an endowment or foundation that is ready to advance its sustainable investing strategy, or if you want to benchmark your progress against the field, or if you're looking for a credible way to show your stakeholders that you're taking these issues seriously, learn more and join the 2025 cohort at endowmentimpactbenchmark.org. I think that's got to be part of the key of pricing, right? Is what the use is, and
precisely.
Yeah. And I guess around that, as I mentioned, the water climate nexus has been a big conversation for a long time, and it shows up in all kinds of ways, I guess. But so I don't even know where to start with a question. But what are your big thoughts and reflection? Obviously, it's changing weather patterns, which is going to, as you said, impact where things happen and where people have access to water, or too much water, or not enough.
It's there are two sides to it. And please do tell me to shut up if I could. I feel very strongly about this.
Go for it.
So the core of it is that we're starting to see kind of an awakening. You've seen some relatively prominent firms like explicitly put out calls for adaptation and resilience companies, like adaptation resilience really means. Water, it's some heat, but really, if you're coming down to the core of it, it means like, are we able to cope with everything from rising seas to depleting aquifers to changing river patterns to changing weather patterns? But really, the way we put it, and this is, it's a nice soundbite, but it just happens to be true. Climate change literally is water change. Like when you're talking about the impact of climate change, like whether you say it's 71 or 74% of the overall impact of it, it's like it's three-quarters of the ball game. Like the way in which climate change is going to be felt is through the medium of water. Now, that's directly or indirectly. Just take LA for example. Now, I'm not going to get into the, excuse my French, but utter bullshit that the water utility had to deal with, because apparently you're able to fight like gigantic epochal wildfires with fire hydrants.
Right,
like,
right.
That is not what they are built for.
Yeah.
Nutcase, opportunist nutcase. It's really disgusting, actually, because it like intrinsically it falls upon the kind of water professionals to justify themselves when they have nothing to justify themselves.
That was brutal.
But nevertheless, like you get loads of rain, you get loads of growth, then the rain goes away, all of that growth dries out, and then suddenly you've got a tinderbox. Like the variability means that you have unpredictability in terms of what you're doing, and so it is in essence kind of like a water issue.
Right.
So what you're looking at in terms of preparing ourselves for what we've baked into our issue, I don't know whether you saw the FT. Well, in fact, it was all over the place. But this January was the hottest January on record when it really shouldn't have been because of La Nina impacts. And it just didn't happen. And it's like it got scary a long time ago, but it really is abundantly clear to us is that like for the pursuit of profit or whatever we thought was expeditious at the time, we have baked climate change into our future and our children's future. And the question is how we cope. And a big part of how we cope is by making sure that we have freely available water resources, so we don't move into like the Mad Max future, because we really don't want the Mad Max future. The Mad Max future is completely avoidable. But we need to really take this idea very seriously, and we need a lot more people running a lot more experiments and a lot more people funding experiments within water, rather than just the water specialists, which is really the only people who are doing it at the seed stage, with some exceptions, but very few. And then on the other side of it, which really pisses me off, is that on the mitigation side of it, water is about 4 times as pertinent to the global GHG, at least 4 times as pertinent to the global GHG profile than, for example, airline emissions. And like you've got all of these people like sustainable airline fuels, we're going to electric airplanes, and like all this kind of shit. Like what? Like we are undercounting methane and nitrous oxide emissions from all types of wastewater treatment to a degree that we just genuinely don't know. We genuinely don't know. And when you're looking at an emissions factor of 24 or whatever the hell it is for methane now, and 300 for nitrous oxide.
Yeah.
Like water's emissions are a bomb, and no one cares because they haven't bothered to educate themselves on the sector. They'd much rather invest in another like suitcase fishing company or like whatever it is, which is fine. We need suitcase fishing. Please, let's all do suitcase fishing. That sounds great. Please. But the degree to which water is being overlooked as a really significant part of the emissions profile of the world is completely baffling to me, to people who profess to really want to get to half gigaton, quarter gigaton, full gigaton, like emissions impacts.
And profess to be like, so data driven and they can't be bothered
they can't be bothered to actually like figure out that like water heaters, for example, are 3%, a deletable 3% of US emissions. And then they're like, well, I'm not sure the heat pump water heater is going to be like, this is crazy.
And to your point about airline emissions, they're like 2%, I think, of global.
Yeah, exactly. It's 2%. Yeah, we are 4.5 times the size.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, falling all over themselves to like throw money at like stuff that, like I'm not a believer in kind of the sort of the like, I guess it would literally be a MAC curve, a marginal abatement cost curve. I think we need to invest in everything all at the same time. And we need to embrace the mess of that. This has got to be like a full throw all of the spaghetti that you can find at the wall. So I don't kind of begrudge it, but it does. I find it very, very difficult to look at people who are spending a lot of time and have put a lot of money to work in things that are looking quite tricky,
Right.
when you could be looking at a lot more boring stuff that can be massively impactful. One example, Enline Energy, they don't actually need any more funding, so people have missed the boat, which I feel bad for them about. But like Penn State is now 60% off grid because they've got three of their Penn State Hospital is now 3% off grid because they've got three of these in the basement. The world runs on steam. We just choose not to.
Right.
We choose to ignore it. And every steam boiler has a pressure step down unit, which should just be known as a purposeful inefficiency, because otherwise the steam would just blow the pipes off the walls. But Enline replaced that pressure step down unit with a turbine, doing the same thing, reducing the pressure of the steam, but just by
Using the energy.
So it's basically
Yeah.
like hydropower essentially.
That's brilliant. I had not heard about
And
that.
like, and this is like, you can just delete
Yeah.
like a huge amount of emissions, but nobody looks at it because they can't. They like, they find it difficult to underwrite. And I'm like, just, well, I don't know. Talk to us. I guess.
We've got to do some difficult things, I guess.
Yeah,
This one, I think you've made the case kind of abundantly clear, but just to make it explicit on the size of the opportunity and the financial component, because we've talked a lot about the impact and the need for this. And, our
yeah.
network of endowments are a lot of them looking for impact, but also looking for those returns. And so,
Oh my God, of course, yeah.
yeah, that
Yeah.
is a part of the thesis.
No, it is. It is. Look, we're explicitly invested in by a number of our LPs because of our potential catalytic impact, right? Which is kind of like, okay, what does that mean? So it's like, because everybody throws this around. Like we've both been in this area for quite a long time, and it's like I'm not always totally sure what that means. But the way in which it could work out for us, the biggest impact that we can have is to show the world that investing in water stuff is not stupid.
Right.
Historically, a lot of very large brand names have gone into water and they have got burned, and they blame the water sector rather than their own crappy underwriting. Like, it is easy to make bad decisions in water, mainly because it's easy to build good stories that are built on sort of lies. And people want
Fantasies.
to believe them. Yeah, people want to
Yeah.
believe them because it sounds awesome, right? And huge impact. And then they ignore that there is no way that you could make the cost structure work. And actually, the laws of physics don't work like that, and all this kind of stuff. But they screw it up, and then they just decide that they don't want to touch water again.
the
because,
sector's
it
fault,
must be
yeah.
water's problem rather than
Right.
actually figuring out whether or not what you were doing was a good idea. So if we can get to our 3x net cash on cash returns and put ourselves in the top decile of fund performance from the 2021 vintage, which is so far been quite a tricky place to be. We are at the moment on track for doing what we want to do, mainly because we stayed out of trouble in 2021. Like, then other people will decide to hire a water partner, or other people will decide to start water funds, or other people will reorient their funds towards kind of adaptation and resilience. We don't want to give up the mitigation side of things, but
Right.
we do want to, frankly, we want other people looking at these opportunities, and we need, if we're
Yeah.
going to secure the future that we need to have more of these experiments run. But it was so important to us going in is that there was, like, the word concession has never left my lips until now, I guess. There was nothing concessionary about this. It was really
Right.
important that we are not saying, look, it'll be like nice and everyone will get kind of like
Yeah.
net maybe. We need people to be investing in providing capital to the renewal and creation of the water infrastructure of the future, because they get to grow their assets in the way that they, either in the case of endowments and foundations, that they are mandated to, right, in order to maintain the impact, whether it's educational or whatever the foundation would be wanting to do. Like, that responsibility is really important, right?
Right.
And there is zero, and I mean zero, reason why it can't be done. Now, we can get into the esoteria of how we think about portfolio construction and death rates and all that kind of stuff, because we're looking at it quite differently in order to get to that 3x net cash on cash returns. This isn't like, we're going to invest in Stripe and 58 other investors aren't going to 58 other investments aren't going to make sense. Like,
Right.
it's a different way of
different
looking
balance
at
and
the early
mix.
stage company's story. But nevertheless, like, we're a seed fund, and we've only had 1-0 since we did the first close of our first fund in February. Oh my God, it's almost our birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, it's in 2 days, February the 9th of 2021. So in 4 years, we've only had 1 0, which for a seed fund is weird.
Yeah.
And so we need to prove it's doable, because there's nothing, you don't need anything concessionary about it. Well, there's like it's $1.6 trillion a year, and of that stuff is basically all spent on like legacy nonsense. Like
Yeah.
it's crying out for a
And
new
it's
set of
also,
solutions.
from a systemic perspective too, it's de-risking a bunch of other investments in their portfolio, just in terms of like the externalities. Yeah.
Yes, precisely. Yeah, exactly. It makes sense all the way down, but people are still kind of scared of it. Our
Yeah.
LPs aren't, and we think our LPs are right. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, Tom, this is great. I would love to go on for a couple more hours on this, but let's wrap it up. And I got my final two questions here that I've been asking everyone. The first
Cool.
is, what is your vision for the future of finance, given all of this?
Um, it's a pretty optimistic one. I mean, for the future of finance, I'll keep it away from just kind of the water specific side of things. I think we're at a very interesting. There was assumption, I think, on, call it like left or progressive or like whatever it is, the generational change, the generational wealth handover that is coming our way will be a de facto good. In terms that it will be massively increased kind of funding to climate and progressive causes and equity and all the rest of it. And I hope that the events of the last, especially the last 6 months, have shown us that we need to stay on our toes. And so I think, if I was to sort of describe it, the vision for the future of finance, or what I would like, and when I envision it, what I would like it to be, is something where all of us are doing the work to justify the confidence of the future holders of capital. Like, obviously, like, so a lot of your members, on the endowments and foundation side of things. And then from like more broadly, as people sort of move into, being stewards of hereditary wealth, whatever you think of that, is that we do the work to justify their confidence, and we don't just sort of sit idly by and think, well, it'll just go to progressive stuff, because it might not. And actually,
Right.
I've seen more examples in the last 6 months of it not going to quote unquote progressive causes. And if we want to harness this changeover for good, then we have some work to do. We have a different attitude, I think, to put out there in terms of the job that needs to be done. So I envision a world in which we have done that work successfully.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's tricky with the framing of like causes, obviously, because these issues, I mean, water, as you've just talked about, is fundamental for everybody, apolitical, and likewise with climate. These issues hit everyone. And I think they've been politicized or been framed as potentially left-right issues, but they really shouldn't be. And it's really frustrating that they are, because, this is
it's mad
stuff that,
water remains. There's a great episode with that we recorded with Mae Stevens, and she sort of listed the Senate votes on the last 5 major water bills, and the average was like 93-3. Like, you don't get those votes on anything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Everyone needs water.
But the climate thing, unfortunately, has been politicized into the ground.
Yeah. And hopefully we can help change that story, because
exactly.
it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, and finally, we are hoping to get this out to lots of college students and people interested in this whole space. What advice would you give them if they wanted to chart a path and venture in the water space?
I will do the space rather than venture. I think venture is very interesting. I think it's slightly people sort of it suits people in venture for the mystique to be slightly more attractive than the reality. And I don't mean that. I love my job. I love my job. But like, there's this sense that kind of like venture's like great. And like, my wife works for the International Rescue Committee, and I think that's amazing. Like she works in malnutrition for childhood refugee populations, and I like try to make good investments. Like, I think we do it in a good area,
Right.
but like, VC is VC is great. I would encourage everybody who wants to do it, but like there are lots of other ways to spend your time.
Yeah.
And what I would say in terms of water, and I actually have a whole list of these, but I'll only say three very quickly. One, it passes the slipper test. Is that when you get out of bed and put your feet in the morning and you slide them into your slippers? Nobody does that, but I get the visual. Like people in water get to feel good about what they do every day. They really do, because essentially what you're working on is something that everybody needs and no one cares about. And once you see it, it's a bit like being like blue or red pilled, whichever the one is. That like you see
it everywhere.
You see an underlay of reality that only you see and the very other people do, and that is tremendously rewarding. And then the other one is the beer test. Is that when you have or like non-alcoholic beer or whatever your tipple is that when you're having a beer with someone and you tell them that you work in and around the water sector, like you get the warm and fuzzies, because you don't have to say like I work for like insert name of the thing that you would be boring or like whatever. I don't want to throw anyone in particular under the bus, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Like at worst, people go, "Oh, cool," and then go off and talk to someone else. Right? Like that's why, at worst, that's what happened.
Right.
But at best, it's like you really do get to be like, yeah, I feel good about this in extrinsic motivation and an intrinsic basis. And then the last thing I will say is that water is crying out for talent. Water is crying out for talent. There is, like, if you want to go into AI, go for it. But you are going to be competing against literally everybody. And it's just like, okay, cool. We're gonna fight over like chatbots, and it's gonna be really helpful. Don't get me wrong, but not my idea of a like. You can come and be tremendously additive, and it's such a collegiate like place to work. And like it's like if you're a like smart person that is willing to work hard, you can go a very, very, very long way and within water and have an amazing career. There is a reason why people, when they get into water, they very rarely leave. It's an amazing place to work. I couldn't speak more highly of my colleagues, and I just pinch myself that I get to do it every day.
That's great. Well, it's a great pitch, and it's great work that you're doing. And thanks again for taking the time to share it with us all. And
well, you too.
Good luck.
Congratulations on all the work you do. Being a real steward of kind of information flows into some of the largest capital bodies in the world. It really is vital, and I really appreciate you having us on. And congratulations for everything.
Thanks, Tom. You too. Have a great day.
Cheers. All the best.
Thanks for tuning in for the Future of Finance podcast. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platform. And please take a moment to rate, review, or share the show. All of this really helps us to reach more people like you who care about creating a thriving and sustainable future. And it's a really easy way to have a big impact. So please do follow. A quick disclaimer, the content of this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice. Investments and strategies discussed may not be suitable for all listeners. Please consult a financial, legal, tax, or accounting professional before making any investment decisions. References to managers and funds are for informational purposes only and should not be considered endorsements or investment solicitations. This podcast does not monitor fund performance or guarantee the accuracy of third-party materials or statements. This has been an episode of the Future of Finance podcast, exploring how finance can shape a vibrant and sustainable future. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.